part out in the audio. James McCann, hi.
Good morning.
Or McCann, as you say
McCann.
it. McCann. That's the way cooler way. American. Welcome. For anyone who is listening to us and can't see what is behind us, we are at the Tularosa farm
Mm-hmm.
in Duluth,
Correct.
in Southern California, right by San Diego.
North San Diego County.
Yeah, this is, for all intensive purposes, the best way to describe this is a work in progress on the way to becoming a coffee farm.
Correct.
How exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for reaching out to me, because I've never been on a coffee farm before. Just 1 second. That's live? Because it hasn't come up here. Let me...
It says we're 1 minute and 18 seconds in.
Oh yes, we're good.
Oh, there we are.
Excellent. It's working. Thank you so much for reaching out to me, because I've never been on a coffee farm. I've always wanted to go onto a coffee farm, but this is even more incredible than just being on a coffee farm. This is the precursor.
This is the embryonic stage, you could say.
And we have experienced some technical difficulties, but I will find a way to get this footage up on our YouTube channel. We were going to upload a bunch of the video footage we took before we sat. A whole bunch of questions. Start from the beginning. Why a coffee farm?
Well, my interest in coffee is about lifelong.
Yeah.
Seriously, you know, it's been 30 years since I dreamt up my first cafe. And I used to own a cafe in Sweden. And about 5 years ago, I really got into roasting. And
Was that here or was that in Sweden?
that was here. I was up in Los Angeles and started roasting. And my wife and I, we were sort of urban farmers in Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. We had a great big vegetable garden in our front yard, and we struggled with keeping our dogs out of our veggie patch. So we started looking for a larger piece of property where we could have dogs and garden separate. And initially we were looking around Pasadena foothills, Altadena, and nothing was quite right for us. And because my wife worked in the film industry, we were trying to stay fairly close to LA. But just on a lark, we decided to sort of cast the net wider and see what else was out there. And suddenly we discovered Duluth. And
had you known about this area?
we'd never heard of it. We had no clue that it was here.
I didn't know it was here. We had no idea where we were heading.
So we took a Sunday drive to say, what is this place that has land available at a reasonable price?
Wow.
And it's not reasonable anymore, but it was when we were looking. And so the first Sunday drive we took down here, we just fell head over heels for it.
I
and we
can
said, this is it.
understand why.
This is where we have to live. And so the project initially started out with just wanting more land to grow vegetables. And we were sort of thinking about market gardening, and it really hadn't occurred to me that you could farm coffee in California as well. And it was actually a friend of mine from Sweden that sent me a link about 3 years ago, and I started doing my research and homework on it, and sort of networking on that topic. And so we came up with this farm and the layout for our coffee plantation here. And because my other line of work as an environmental consultant, I spent 7 years in the solar industry up in LA. And as I realized that solar really had a foothold, you know, it's not going away, it's growing, people understand it, people accept it.
It's here for good.
But what the real crisis is our water.
Yeah.
And people really aren't paying enough attention to our water needs and our water resources. You know, every time we get an inch of rain, billions of gallons of water run out to sea.
Yeah.
and it's completely unnecessary. We drove past Deleuze Creek this morning, a dry creek bed, right? I was talking to our beekeeper who's been beekeeping for 40 years, and he's lived at his property since, I think, 1989. And I said, Dan, when was the last time you saw the creek running year-round? And he said that when he moved in, back in the late 80s, the creek ran about 10 months out of the year.
Wow.
Last year, in 2016, 2017, we had a lot of rain over winter, and the creek ran for a good 4 or 5 months.
And that's a good year.
And that's a good year. This year, we did not hardly get any rain at all over the winter, and that creek has been bone dry all year long.
Yeah.
And so that need to harvest rain, is very important. So if you've seen, I've got a rain cistern at the front of the house, collecting off the roof and the rain gutters. There's another cistern in the center of the house, and then there's another at the back of the house. So basically, for every 1,000 square foot of roof space you have, you get about 600 gallons of water for an inch of rain. So it's really not that we have a lack of rainfall. I mean, we do have a lack of rainfall as well.
But
the rain that we
so much
do
of it.
get, we waste.
Where are you capturing it and where is it going? So you're capturing it across the roof and across all of...
Right. So on the house, because this is set up as an urban demonstration garden, we're harvesting rain off the rooftops into large rain barrels. These are, people are maybe used to a 50-gallon or 80-gallon rain barrel. That one is 650 gallons. That one is 800 gallons. And then at the back, we actually have used one of the green yard debris bins.
Yeah.
And because the city provides those for free, or the waste management company provides those for free. So basically, we just put that below a downspout to capture rain instead of putting our green waste into
gravity.
it. And then I just dip my water bucket in there and I go out and I water my potted plants.
Yeah, wow.
And so it's just to demonstrate very simple and very economical techniques for capturing some of that rain.
Now I'm going to sound like a real city girl here, but you were talking to me about something that I'd never heard of before.
Okay.
Which was the burying the logs underneath the garden.
Sure.
For water retention purposes. Can you talk to me about that? That fascinated me.
Yeah. So the largest and cheapest way to store water is to store it in the ground. And so what we do is we dig trenches first that are called swales. And it's a trench that's on the contour of the landscape. So basically the overarching concept is to slow, spread, and sink the water into the ground. So the other property, I'm going to give you a link to the YouTube videos of the water harvesting systems that we set up there.
We will include those in the show notes for anyone that's listening, for the YouTube videos on Stitcher and on Apple Podcasts. Yeah,
so this is a 80-acre farm that during the rainstorms of January 2017, it basically just blew out an entire hillside from erosion.
Yeah, wow.
And the family had a small river flowing through their living room.
Jesus.
And so even though we had already planned on building a swale system, we really hadn't planned on a swale system that was large enough to handle that volume of rain.
Yep.
So
come on this side. No, stop. Sorry, I'm really sorry. Your microphone's a little loud. That's all.
Sorry if I'm over projecting.
No, that's all. You have a great you have great projection and I don't. So I'm like, how do we balance this out a wee bit? So there we go. Sorry about that.
That's all right. So with this new knowledge of how much rain we could potentially get, 2 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, that's a lot for the landscape to process. So when you have basically dry, compacted soils and a lot of rainfall, that rain is just going to fall and sheet
like cement, right?
And just flow off the land.
Yeah.
Very, very little of it is going to sink in. And so through earthwork structures, we give the water a place to flow to introduce entropy into the system, and we take away the destructive force of the water and we allow it to sink in. And so where there's water, there's life, right? So in those dry compacted soils, there's very little soil microbiology. But as we start to bring water into that, then the microbiology can begin to flourish, and then we can feed that through composting and nitrogen fixing plants and things like that. So what the logs then do in this system is we bury wood, and it can be big fat logs, it can be smaller branches, it's leaves, it's mulch, it's kitchen compost, other compost from yard clippings and whatnot. So that acts as a sponge. So as that water sits on top of that log and the log soaks it up, it becomes just a sponge that's going to hold that water
retention vessel.
because it's buried underground. You're not going to lose anything to
Yeah.
evaporation, and then the tree's roots are going to find that moisture.
Because the trees are going to, as they're cementing themselves in and then rooting themselves in, they're looking for the water
They're
source,
looking
right?
for the water source.
And as more water comes in through the system, the log is going to continue to absorb more of it.
Right,
is
right. So if you imagine like a dry kitchen sponge, right?
Yeah.
And if you hold that dry kitchen sponge under the tap, most of the water is going to run off.
Yep.
But if you put that water, or you put that sponge in a glass and let it soak some water up, and then you squeeze all that water out and hold it under the tap again,
Yeah.
it's going to soak up
Yeah.
much water faster, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of idea for the logs that are buried under the ground, is that as they retain moisture, they actually create the conditions
Yeah.
for the earth to receive more water and hold it longer.
Yeah. And the root system's channeling water out of that into the trees.
Right.
And the log has room to absorb more water.
Correct.
So
And the logs, they also invite in the mycorrhizal fungi networks, and so you get the communication between the plants
mycelium.
through the mycelium, and it just exponentially increases the soil fertility. And the longer the system is there, it's the technique is actually called hugelkultur, and it was sort of coined by a man in Switzerland named Sepp Holzer. And he's like growing citrus in the Alps. It's just
What?
incredible, the things that he's doing. And so he's been a big inspiration. Actually, a lot of what we learn comes from teachers in Australia, where rainwater harvesting is the norm, right?
I wish. In Sydney we have a really big problem whereby we have, in the summer, we have and I miss this so much because it gets really hot here in California. And being raised a Sydney kid, the afternoons getting close to sunset, we have thunderstorms. And so I sit there and just naturally wait for the thunderstorm to come. And the thunderstorms in Sydney happen in the very late end of the day, most days in summer.
Interesting.
But we don't capture any of that water. And so our dams are running dangerously low to empty, but we get this enormous amount of rain that happens the whole way through most of our summers.
Right.
But unfortunately, that's just running off to sea.
Right.
Sure, we went through drought for a good 10 years, but this is when we're not in drought. It typically, and it's back to doing that, we get these beautiful, big, massive thunderstorms that happen on a regular basis through summer, and we just lose all of that water. 7 million people in Sydney, and we don't have enough water for all of those people.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm sure in places like the Blue Mountains, they harvest their rainwater. In other parts where there's a lot of agricultural land in northern Queensland, where they grow lots of bananas and things like that, I'm sure that they are able to harvest the rainwater in a much more intelligent way so that they can minimize how much water they need to grow their crops.
So that's part of what we're doing is we're building this property, and our properties that we're sort of sharecropping on, I guess you could say, because so few people have information about these techniques, and seeing them on YouTube or reading about them in a book is one thing, but we want to create basically a living laboratory where people can come, they can see it firsthand, they can see the results, in the fruits that's being harvested from there, and so we thought, what a brilliant thing to do is to combine coffee along with our environmental restoration work, to kind of engage people, in an approachable way, to give them something, that they're curious about and that they can kind of see it, the full life cycle of the process.
I know that there's up in Santa Barbara, there's coffee farms up there. They've been there for 5 years. years,
I think
something
they actually started establishing them maybe 7 years ago.
7 years.
Yeah.
They're getting into that point where they're harvesting and selling coffee and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
How long will it take before, once you plant, because we're still a ways off planting, right?
Right. Yeah, we've got seedlings in the nursery right now that are scheduled to go in the ground around October, November. Kind of depends on what the weather looks like.
Yeah.
You know, we were so hot and so dry last year, so late into the year, that if those conditions persist this year, you know, we may delay planting a little bit. But if we get some October and November rains, then we'll start planting straight away.
Is this your first farm of anything? Have you ever had a farm before?
This is my first farm, yeah, but I grew up on a small farm in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. So I
this
grew
is
up
not
around.
new to you,
Not new
but
to me, no.
running your own farm is new
Right.
to you.
Yeah, no. As a kid, I earned my summer monies picking strawberries and in apple orchards picking apples and.
That doesn't sound like it sucks, mate.
Well,
I'm sure it felt like
it does when
sucked
you're
at the
13 or
time.
14, right? No, my
But I just ate
sister.
your mandarins, and that was the best mandarin I've had in my whole fucking
Oh,
life.
thank
It was
you.
so good.
Thank you. Yeah, the fruit from Duluth in general is just incredibly delicious.
Yeah, I'm sure it does not suck now.
Yeah.
Being the age that you are, to come and be able to eat off your guavas and eat your mandarins and your limes and all this beautiful, delicious food that this is a fully edible garden. What was the flower that I ate? It was the garlic flower.
That was called society garlic.
That was incredible.
Yeah.
I kind of, for a minute, wished I ate eggs so I could put that on eggs. It was delicious. And then there was the other one, the
We like it
orange
because
flower.
all parts of the society garlic are edible, from
Wow.
the bulb to the foliage to the flower.
Uh-huh.
It's drought tolerant, and it'll grow in very nutrient deficient soils.
I need to get me some of that.
And so that's really what the focus of our edible gardening is. It's not just to try and, you know, force a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
We are trying to understand our climate and our microclimates and our soil conditions. And, you know, we're looking for the highest, best use
Of the
land and the
Yeah.
resources, right? And so, you know, what a phenomenal opportunity we have there in coffee to take advantage of underused farmland.
Yeah.
And we were discussing earlier how some of the avocado farmers out here have had their avocado groves die off for lack of water. We have neighbors with wells, and the wells have gone dry. And other neighbors that are using the municipal water supply to water their groves, but that's now cost prohibitive because there's just too much competition in the marketplace for them
Is
to
that
farm
competition
profitably.
in Mexico, competition in other parts?
A lot of it is avocados imported from Mexico that has harmed the farmers in this region. So what you have.
Sorry to cut you off there, or to interrupt, but what you were saying before, just to give people an understanding of what that looks like, the municipal water is being used to feed the trees,
Right.
and the avocados are growing, but the avocados are costing a couple dollars per pound to create and to pick, but they can only sell them for $1 a pound, so they just don't pick it.
Just, you know, kind of rough numbers,
right?
right.
Rough numbers, but just as an example's sake, the point being that it is so significantly less than what it costs for them to do it that
Right.
it's just not worth them picking
Right.
it.
So fortunately, there are a lot of organic groves out here, and so they
Yeah.
get a premium for their
Yeah.
fruit. And you know, most of the bigger ones, they do have wells, multiple wells.
Yeah.
So, but what you do have is you have people out here who've given up on farming because
Really?
the climate, the water issues, and so you could have a 5-acre parcel of avocados and the owner's pretty much just walked away because he can't make money at it anymore. So what we want to do is come in with our nonprofit organization and instruct and assist in consulting on water harvesting that will help them take advantage of the natural resources in a better fashion.
Yeah, wow.
So they don't get into such dire straits with their orchards. Or you have people who are moving out here and they're buying that parcel of land and they don't know what to do with it because they're not farmers. They just think it's beautiful out here like I do, and they wanted to buy, you know, a piece of property in the country. So those people need a lot of help. And so that's actually 9 out of 10 of our clients are sort of the urbanites that have moved to the country and they need some help managing their groves. So we kind of offer a two-step solution. They don't necessarily know where to bring their produce to market, but we have a fantastic network, both in San Diego, Los Angeles, and up in the greater Portland area in Oregon, where we can send fruit to. And we're working on taking it out to Albuquerque and other parts of the country where we have some relationships with people as well. So we can help them with water harvesting to improve the health of their groves, help them with soil fertility, and harvest the fruit and take it to market. So they get help and they get a small income stream off their land.
And your method of farming is called permaculture, right?
Right. Permaculture is kind of the design science that inspires us. You had sort of that
Great
aha,
word, design science.
right?
I love that. It's the design science.
So everything it's based on natural systems and natural principles, and we're trying to work with Mother Nature instead of against Mother Nature. So you might see a lot of weeds in my garden, but that's okay. They serve a purpose.
Yeah.
Those we'll cut down, we'll compost, and they'll actually feed the soil again. And for example, you see a lot of mint growing over there. That's a cover crop that's going to smother out the other weeds eventually.
Yeah, wow.
But it's a multi-purpose, medicinal plant.
What about microbes? Let's talk about, there's a million different offshoot conversations
Sure.
we're going to have. But what role does microbes play in just this kind of edible garden that you're creating? Microbes can come from just the general atmosphere, through manure that you use. How has that played a role in creating the thriving ecosystem that you're trying to
Right.
make happen here?
So I'm not a scientist, and I don't know a lot about soil microbes. But what I do know is what we're feeding the soil and how we're feeding
Yeah.
the soil, and I know the results that we're getting from it. So we use mushroom compost, we use kitchen scraps, yard clippings. We've got access to horse manure. We have sheep, and so we get the straw from the sheep pens and spread that on the garden. And all of those things contain nutrients that are feeding the soil. So as the soil builds up more of a humic layer, it becomes spongier and can retain more moisture. And the more moisture there is, the more activity you're going to have in the soil. And so when you have good, healthy soil, you're going to end up with good, healthy plants and fruit and vegetables that taste really good.
And that takes
So
some time
that's-
to build up.
Yeah, it
obviously.
does. And it's, we're about 2 years into it right now. So the beds that are behind you, these are 2 years old.
Wow.
And this year there is really going to be probably their peak production.
And then you have to reset it?
No, we don't reset it. It's just that fertility builds year after year after year after year.
And now it's going to start to be fruiting, for lack of a better word.
Right.
You'll be able to start.
Right. We had really good results out of it last year, but the fertility this year is even better.
Great.
And next year it'll be even better. And so, but as time goes on, now we're adding, some chicken manure and things like that off the farm into the mix. But as time goes on, we'll need to do that less and less.
And it's not stuff that, that's the idea of permaculture, right? Like, it's not stuff that you have to go out and buy. It's here, it's present.
Right.
And you're recycling everything that's a part of this
Right.
ecosystem.
But we
to
don't,
bring back
we
into it.
do want to be as self-contained
Yeah.
as possible. But we do look for local outside inputs as well. So there's a lot of horse ranches out here. And so we look up, the horse ranches that are using organic alfalfa to feed their horses, and we want to get that manure as
Yeah,
opposed
wow.
to the farmer who's feeding his horses on Bermuda grass, because the Bermuda grass can actually germinate in the horse manure, and then we would have a
really?
Bermuda grass problem. And so we're a little bit picky about the inputs.
That's good.
There's an organic shiitake mushroom farm on the other side of town.
I
and
wanna
so
go there.
they have their spent mushroom compost. After that substrate has produced all the mushrooms it's
Yeah.
going to produce, they just put it in a big pile and they say,
Whoever
come and get
wants
it.
some.
And so we'll drive over there with the truck and a couple of shovels, and we'll load up the truck in 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll come home and we'll spread that all over the farm. And then we'll actually get shiitake mushrooms popping up here and there
That doesn't
from that.
suck.
So no, it doesn't suck
They're
at
one
all,
of my
right?
favorite mushrooms.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I'm like, I'm going to go to the shiitake mushroom place.
So, and then like I said, I had the one neighbor whose well went dry and his avocado grove died, and he cut down his avocado trees because he just knew that it wasn't the responsible thing to be growing anymore. And so we've buried all of those avocado logs back into the soil. So they act as a sponge to hold moisture for a good long time for the plant's roots to go down and tap into. But also, think about this. That avocado tree grew here, right?
Yeah.
It pulled nutrients out of the ground to sustain itself for, 30 or 40 years. So we're basically taking that, instead of like putting it in a burn pile and
We're
burning it, we're reintroducing all
reinvesting
that,
it back into
minerals and things into the ground. So
which just revitalizes the soil for when you're ready
Right.
to plant on that crop again,
Right.
plant a crop on that lot again, right?
yeah, exactly.
I want to get a little bit into the idea of the mindset that is required for somebody who leaves the corporate world, because you were in the corporate world. The mindset from leaving a safe life in the city, etc., starting your own farm,
Yeah.
mindset fascinates me. What was that like? What's going on in your head when you're like, okay, I'm going to open a coffee farm. I have no fucking idea what I'm doing.
Well, it's a big scary leap, to be sure.
It felt scary.
Yeah, a little bit. It's an uncertain future.
Great.
And we've had to deal with a lot of adversity since moving out here.
Like what?
Well,
If you don't mind sharing.
yeah, I don't mind sharing at all. We've had gophers come in and eat our whole crop. So
For anyone who's not American, what's a gopher?
okay, a gopher is a little underground dwelling rodent that basically nourishes itself off of the
They're
roots
little
of plants.
thieves.
Yeah, yeah. They'll kill an adult fruit tree
Wow.
by eating its roots.
That's what our kangaroos do.
So since we're in such a dry landscape, when we put out water for our animals or we water our garden, they immediately know there's moisture there.
And
there's
it's not
water
like they're
there.
deliberately trying to come and fuck
Yeah.
you up.
My wife calls them land sharks.
They're just doing their normal thing.
They're just doing their normal
just-
thing, right?
They don't know that they're stealing your
And
livelihood.
it's like trapping them is fairly futile, because if I put out a trap and I take that gopher away, I've basically just left a free condominium for another gopher
Yeah,
family to
right.
move into. And so what we're trying to do is put stinky stuff down underground. They really don't like fish emulsion. And
Oh.
so fish emulsion is a wonderful fertilizer for the garden, but it stinks to high heaven. And so the gophers move away. And so that's basically where we want to make the area less attractive to the gophers. They'll move downhill. I hope they don't move onto my neighbor's
I was
property.
just going to
then my
say,
neighbors
your
will be mad
neighbor's
at
going to
me,
love you. Do they reproduce the same way that mice and rats do?
I don't think they're quite as prolific, but I don't know that.
That was a
for
gopher
certain.
that dropped that on your head.
Oh, doesn't surprise me. So, and then, like I said, we've had insane fluctuations in the weather. We had
It's been
over 100
bizarre.
degree heat wave in January this year.
It was bizarre.
And, so that just wiped out a whole bunch of our winter garden that just wasn't prepared for that heat. My arugula and things like that immediately started to bolt and go to seed when I should have had 3 months of arugula harvest off
Yeah,
of that.
wow.
And then a month later, we had a hard freeze like we haven't seen before out here. Maybe some of our other neighbors have, but we've only been out here, about 3 years.
And what does that do to your mindset? Does that,
Oh, it's a big emotional setback.
can imagine.
I have 3 dead papaya trees, and they were just getting to the point where they were going to give us fruit this year. We've got 2 years invested in those papaya trees, and now they're gone.
what does that
And
do
so
to you?
as our approach for the coffee farm, it's like we know that coffee isn't going to, withstand a heavy freeze. And so we've got to employ, techniques and tools to make sure that if we do anticipate a freeze, that we get them protected. And we can do that with, shade coverings. We can do that with deep watering of the root systems will help protect, the plant in a heavy freeze and things like that. So
What if you don't anticipate it though?
if you don't anticipate, I think you have to anticipate it. You always have to. I mean, I'm not
But
going to
what if you
anticipate
can't
it in
see it
July.
coming? Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But
So-
pretty much, December through maybe February, March, we keep an eye on the weather constantly out here. We're always doing rain dances and keeping an eye out for rain, and
That's
you
that
know,
permaculture
making sure that
approach.
the rain barrels are open and ready to accept
Uh-huh.
rain. And it's, if I have 600 gallons stored and there's a rainstorm coming in, I'm going to go use that 600 gallons on my garden right now
Yep. So that you
and
can
totally
capture more.
refresh that system, right? So,
Especially because that water that you're putting into your garden isn't just getting wasted into the ground, it's going into the logs that are already
right,
under there, getting ready to receive it.
correct. Yep.
Wow, how exciting and how terrifying all at the same time.
Yeah. And so what I'm really passionate about is helping preserve farmland. I mean, can you imagine if this area ever got developed and there was
No.
just housing everywhere?
That just sounds like
We have
terrible.
some of the best fruit production in the entire country in the Deleuze Creek watershed, and so we have to help protect those farms. And one way of protecting the farms is to make them economically viable. And under the current situation with water, they're not economically viable. So we really have to focus on the water harvesting to make the farms more economically
That's
viable.
the priority right now,
Right?
right? Especially as we're in a drought.
And if we can get more farms to transition, from a conventional agriculture over to organic, then so much the better.
Yeah.
And so fortunately, most of the farms that we're working with are interested in getting organic certified or are already organic certified.
How important is that certification?
That's an interesting question. So I'm kind of two minds of it. Most of the produce and food that I buy is organic, so it's important to me. And the reason that it's important to me is because I want to support the farmers that are employing those practices. However, an organic monoculture of carrots, over, say it was 100 acres of carrots, right? That's still a monoculture.
Yeah.
That's not the way Mother Nature would do things.
Right.
So just because it's organic doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best.
And does the organic certification, how much can we trust that it really is organic?
Well, I think you can. I think you can trust it. The farmers that I'm familiar with on a personal basis, they're some of the most ethical people that I've ever met, and they're really concerned about their farm and the soil and the food that they feed their families.
Yeah.
And a lot of them got into it because of their families and their care and concern for what they were consuming themselves. So they don't want to send something out to market that they wouldn't eat themselves. And we're the same way.
But can you trust, I mean, I'm someone who eats organic and buy organic in everything that I can buy. It does make you wonder sometimes when you buy an organic tomato and it doesn't taste like an organic tomato.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you think, well, it says produce of the USA, so I can't sit here and wonder if they have different practices in another country because it's from this country.
Right.
But I can tell you this does not taste like an organic tomato because I eat organic tomatoes all the time and they taste like tomatoes.
Right.
Whereas non-organic tomatoes taste like plastic to me. And it just makes you wonder, like, how much can you trust that side of things?
Well, because I know how difficult it is to get organic certified, and
Is it expensive?
It is expensive. It's I'm not going to say cost prohibitive, but it's expensive. So they're required to file a lot of paperwork. So it's not just the certification; it's keeping up all the reports and records. And so they're inspectors and things that are out and checking up on people all the time and making sure that they're keeping their compliance. So if you go to a reputable grocery store and you buy organic produce from the reputable grocery store, that grocery store, I worked in grocery distribution for some time. I know all the
As the
handover to
grocery
Whole
store?
Foods in order
Okay.
to sell your product to Whole Foods. And so all the paperwork has to be in order if you're going to sell produce to a grocery store, reputable. Now, in the restaurant industry, there may be a little bit more cheating. If somebody
that
says on
wouldn't
their
shock me
menu,
at all.
"Oh yeah, we have organic arugula on our salads," and maybe they're cheating, maybe they're not.
Yeah.
So I think that's an area where the more familiar you are with the establishment and maybe even the ownership behind it, and you know that they're good, solid, ethical people,
Yep.
then you could trust it. But if you're just out, along the highway and stop off somewhere,
Who knows?
who knows, right?
So with
more difficult to track.
oh yeah, but I'd still rather buy off the side of the road for some reason. There's a romance
Yeah.
behind doing something like that.
So here's the other side of that coin, right? At present, we're not organic certified, and
They're chemical free.
right.
That's really all I care about. I just want to know I'm not putting toxins into my
Yeah.
body. And I don't care about their certification. When you're seeing the person time after time after time, and they can say to you, we don't use any chemicals.
Right.
And you can taste something that's, once you've been eating organic long enough, you can organic and when it's not.
Right. Yeah, and that's our goal really. It's to feed the soil to get the best produce, fruit or vegetables or coffee. It's the organic certification is less important to me in my farming endeavors, but I know that
It
the
carries
people who are
weight.
going to buy my coffee, they put a lot of emphasis on that, and they want to make sure. And so if I'm selling coffee to someone in Missouri and they can't visit my farm personally or know me personally,
Yeah.
then that stamp is quite important to have.
So it will be a 100% organic farm.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's exciting because a lot of when people ask me about Elixir and they say, so is Elixir organic? And I'm somebody who I don't place a lot of weight on labels.
Mm-hmm.
In most ports, if you're getting agricultural product in from another country, they have to fumigate the container anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if it was organic in the country that it left, by definition, it stops becoming organic once you've fumigated it.
Yeah.
And so I can't really tell people that, yes, I can guarantee anything's organic unless I know that it's not being brought in from another country and it's not being fumigated. Because
Right.
the reason people ask is because they don't want to put chemicals into their body either.
And I don't know much about fumigation of imported produce, but I think irradiated produce coming across the border is something that's fairly normal.
Yeah.
And I don't know if imported organic, let's say we were getting an organic Granny Smith apple from New Zealand into the port of LA. I don't know if that, because it's organic, gets to bypass that irradiation process.
Yeah.
That, maybe some other fruit from, a farm that wasn't an organic farm overseas. I don't know.
In our laws in Australia are so strict. You're not allowed to bring any kinds of fruit across any of our borders.
Oh, really?
If you go from one state to the other,
Mm-hmm.
you have to throw everything out.
Oh, wow.
If you are coming in on the plane from any other country, any other state even, you have to declare that you have no fruit with you.
Right. You have to do that crossing from Oregon into California
Really?
as well. Yeah.
Well, because we're trying to protect our agricultural
Right.
here. Do you have to do it going into, let's say, crossing borders into New York or any other states other than California?
I think because California, we provide like 80% of the, probably don't monitor it as much.
Talk to me about the role that bees will play in coffee farming, local coffee farming in California. Because the way that I'm seeing it is once people start to, we are growing coffee in California, it's going to become more sought after as a, that lifestyle kind of
Right.
farming that people want to do after they leave the corp. And we're experiencing a lot in the news about colony collapse with regards to bees.
Right.
What role could coffee farming play in helping bees come back, particularly organic coffee farming, given that things like Roundup and help restore bee colonies there potentially?
So yeah, there's a couple of different things that are impacting bee populations. One of them is the pesticides, and then the other is the drought. It's bees need a source of water, and so
Do they need a lot of water?
they can get it from the nectar in
The
a flower,
flowers.
but then
There's-
that plant needs the water
Yeah.
in the ground. So we work with a beekeeper out here in Duluth who's been beekeeping for 40 years, and he brings hives over to our property. So we have hives here 6 or 7 months out of the year, and we're also working on establishing a bee estuary,
How exciting.
so that we've got dedicated farmland set aside for, you know, bees to forage and reproduce, and our beekeeper breeds queens so that we can increase the bee population. But he generally has about 20% of his bee population die off every winter.
Is that a high number, or is that a pretty standard number?
It's higher than it was for him in the past, according to what he's told me.
Levels of concern for him?
He's concerned about it, absolutely. It impacts the economics of his business if he has a large die-off of his population. He has to be very careful about where he takes his bees. So he takes his bees up to almond farms farther north in California, so that the bees pollinate those almond orchards so that we get all the almonds that we need. He takes them to orange farms so that they'll pollinate all the orange trees.
You know, have you heard of, there's a black market for queens.
Oh, really?
There was a story.
They're expensive. They're like $25 each if you buy them mail order.
And it's illegal to kill one.
Oh, yeah?
In California. But there is I'm not sure where he was going from. There was an NPR story about a farmer who was, he had experienced colony collapse. He had only a few hives left. He was basically bankrupt, wanted to try and recoup some money from these last few hives. He was on his way to Northern California. Had arrived a few hours early, and it was the middle of the night. And so he parked his van on the side of the road, went into a motel, and came back and found that the hives had been stolen from his van. And apparently what had happened was this group of people had gone and stolen the hives across many of the farms in California on that day.
Wow.
In the middle of
That's
the night.
crazy.
And apparently it's becoming a black market. Isn't that crazy?
That blows my mind. No idea.
Yeah, check it out. The NPR story was just really fascinating, that this is where we've gotten to. And who's stealing these things, and where are they taking them?
Right.
I mean, is there some other places that they're taking them? And this is really dangerous. We're experiencing
It's got to be,
collapse.
you know, if there's a black market, it's got to be going to some other farmer. I mean, I can't imagine
out of the
anyone else that would need
country, or where could it be going? How could you smuggle queens out of the country?
them. I don't know if you would. I don't know.
But yeah, just really fascinating. So there will be a role for bees on this farm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll always provide habitat for the bees. We provide water source for the bees to come to as well.
Will they be the primary way that pollinization happens for coffee trees? I don't know a lot about the way that coffee trees are pollinized.
Yeah, so this is kind of honeybees are extremely important pollinators for any agricultural crop. However, they're not the only pollinators. You know, butterflies pollinate, hummingbirds pollinate, other kinds of moths and flies and insects pollinate. So really, when we create what's called a bee sanctuary, we're really providing habitat for a lot of different pollinators and insects. So if you think about a very tiny wildflower, that has a tiny pollinator in nature that's associated with it. If you think of a large blossom, like on a rose bush or something like that, that tends to have a larger pollinator like a bee. But even in bees, I mean, we're talking about, basically European honeybees that are farmed commercially or raised, in apiaries. But there's dozens of varieties of bees, existing in nature. One kind is called a carpenter bee, and the carpenter bee basically lives in a hole bored in wood, and so they will lay their egg as far back into that hole as possible, and then they'll basically make a little cellulose cell, and they'll put food in there, so that when the larvae hatches, it comes and it eats that.
Aren't they considerate parents?
And so it goes through multiple stages of that.
Really?
Yeah, and so each larva has its own food supply until it emerges and is able to fly and forage for itself.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love this shit.
And
I could watch these channels online. I can watch them forever.
And carpenter bees don't sting. They have no stinger. And so they're a kind of bee that people don't have to be afraid of. And you can literally just take a 4x4 and drill a whole bunch of, half-inch holes in it and hang it out, and the carpenter bees will find it and colonize it.
Wow. Do you How long do you anticipate that it's going to take to get it up and running?
I think we'll have coffee ready to process and bring to market in 2 years.
That quick?
Yeah. It's going to be a small crop. Our 3rd and 4th year crop will be the more commercially viable.
How big is small?
Well, the mature coffee trees should yield between 50 and 60 pounds of coffee cherries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only about 10% of that that's actually the green coffee bean that we'll be able to roast. So
proper micro lot size.
yeah,
Like really, really tiny.
right. Because of the soil fertility and the moisture that we're introducing into the system, we're fairly confident that our crop yields and our crop quality will be a little bit higher than average.
And it will grow year on year.
Just
based
because
on
that's
the
what happens with our other fruit trees.
Yeah.
You know, you look at our figs and our limes and things
figs
like
here?
that.
Figs are my second favorite.
Oh, are
fruit
they really?
in the world.
Oh,
Peanut butter first.
yeah, we've got,
second.
we have some wonderful,
It's not fig
on a
season now
neighboring,
yet, though. Is
not quite yet, no. But we have some fig varieties imported from Italy that are really unique that you don't see in the
I'm
marketplace
really
here.
hoping I
And
get
they're
an
like
email
candy.
or a phone call
Yeah,
when that happens.
right. It's good to know that you like the figs.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, they're one of our key crops out here because, you know, it's Mediterranean climate analog. They need, you know, less water inputs. They survive in fairly nutrient deficient soils, but that fig can either be harvested and eaten fresh, or you can dry it and sell it as a dried fig, or we can make it into jams and things like that. So we want to find the produce that thrives in dry climates, is as nutrient dense as possible, but also has the greatest flexibility to go out into the marketplace.
I just
without
think that it's a food from the
we
gods.
don't, yeah, it is. we don't want any food to go to waste ever.
That's so great. Talking about food from the gods, can we have some
Oh,
of
yeah.
this? What hour would you like?
18.
Okay, I'll start with the 14. Yeah, excuse us, we're having some elixir. Do you want some? Cheers.
Cheers. I definitely feel the headiness of this.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a different kind of
Yeah.
caffeine rush. Go for it. Oh, it smells so good. This is the cat and cloud. Ethiopia, I can never say it. Jadebe. I keep thinking like my accent is saying that wrong.
Uh-huh.
And everyone keeps saying, no, it's right, but it feels wrong.
Yeah.
Jadebe.
You know, it's interesting that it was actually the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe that got me super passionate about roasting coffee.
Yeah?
It was
A lot of people say that about
I've drank coffee my entire life,
Uh-huh.
pretty much, since I grew up in the restaurant business. You know, there was always after a meal at a restaurant, my mom and dad would always order in a cup of coffee. And this whole ritual, I think, has pretty much vanished from our society.
I
And I'd
agree.
kind of like to see it come back because, you know, it's my sister and I, after the plates were cleared off the table, the waitress would bring coffee and we'd be like, oh no, here we go. And we're going to be talking for hours. But we'd have crayons
and it's such a lovely thing,
coloring
though,
tablets.
isn't it?
Yeah, so you just basically relax. And in Sweden, it was way more common to have a cup of coffee after the meal as well. And it's just kind of a nice moment to, you know, rest and digest the food, not be in a hurry to go someplace else, catch up with a chat and things like that. So coffee was a pretty pervasive moment in my life, you know, throughout growing up. And so I started drinking it, you know, as pretty much as soon as I was allowed to.
What was your first
13,
coffee?
14.
Was it like an Nescafe or a Folgers or something like that?
No, well, maybe an instant coffee, because we used to go backpacking and camping a lot in the Cascade Mountains in Oregon, and so my parents would bring along instant coffees. But, you know, it just brewed restaurant coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a bit different for you, the elixir.
This is very different. This is
It was so fun
astonishing.
watching you while we were having all our technical difficulties, watching you just sit there and sit between the two of them.
Well, it's remarkable how different the character really is between the 14 and the 18.
This 14 tastes to me like a latte, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. Are you tasting that? It tastes like honey.
I get the fruit,
Honey and like manuka honey, I think.
the lemon element. There, yeah, I get the honey.
And then you get this lactic-y thing happen on the aftertaste that
Right.
makes it Are you getting that?
Maybe that lactic is what I'm perceiving as lemony.
Okay. The
It's definitely got
lactic
this tartness that's
Yeah.
sort of, you know,
gets
making my
the
taste
glands
buds
here.
twinge. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it messes with my head every time I drink it. But you had a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah, I'm very curious about how
That I wouldn't let you ask. before.
was this something that sort of occurred to you by accident, as many
Yeah.
things in science do?
Yeah. I was, we've told this story in the podcast before, but so sorry for anyone who's hearing this again. But it's really fun the way that this happened. I was coming up with a cake recipe. I was the head barista at a high-end bakery in Sydney. And we had no room to do anything other than espresso. And I wanted to expand the coffee program. So I had said to the head baker, can I come up with a dessert? Because we haven't got any room to do batch brew or pour overs or anything. Can I come up with a dessert that features a single origin coffee? And he said yes, but I was told that the brief was it had to be spectacular. No espresso brownies, nothing like that. So my idea was to come up with a ginger and cardamom cake that had vanilla bean buttercream in the center and on top. And then on top of that was going to be a pear that was poached in coffee.
Wow.
But the exceptional part that I wanted to bring into this was that I wanted the nuances in the single origin that we were eventually going to choose to use. I wanted that to be amplified in the pear without us adding anything to the poaching fluid.
Yeah.
So if the coffee we chose had blueberries in as one of the flavor profiles, I wanted that amplified enough so that you could naturally taste that in the pear.
Interesting.
So that the coffee was the source of that flavor
Yeah.
profile. And through, at the time I was exploring the science of cymatics. That was when I was really getting into cymatics and sacred geometry and how these ratios appear in nature and really bed things down. Like nature has got everything perfect. So I used a method to try and create this poaching fluid, and then I tasted it and never poached a pear because that poaching fluid was elixir.
Wow. Wow.
We were on the market 6 months later,
That's incredible.
and in America 6 months after that.
So what brought you to San Diego instead of
It's not LA.
Seattle or Portland, another coffee mecca of the country?
San Diego is not Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Sorry for anyone who's living in Los Angeles, but I did my time in LA. I had lived there a couple of years, about 6 years ago, when I was, trying to become full-time in the music industry. And, to me, LA was the kind of shithole that I didn't want to live in. And when I left, I swore I'd never live in America again.
Did you hear that woodpecker?
Yeah, I was trying not to get distracted by it. It's so fucking cool, the animals that you can hear here. I'm like, my head is going so excited about this.
I'm still a big fan of Los Angeles. I love the incredible cultural diversity.
That I love.
The food, I love the Getty Museum, the Griffith Observatory, Frank Lloyd Wright House, the Hollyhock House. There's so much in LA that it will take you a lifetime to absorb it all. And I've only scratched the surface. If you can get there. And this is one of the things that sort of drove us out of LA and into the country was, Griffith Observatory is one of my favorite places in the whole world. And it used to be I could just drive up there and I might have to, circle once or twice in the parking lot to get a parking spot, but it wouldn't take more than 5 minutes. Now you have to park downhill and take a bus up because you're never going to find a parking spot. And that, maybe 5 years transitioned from being accessible to just everything was too crowded to even get in anymore.
And that was when I was there.
Yeah.
It was going through that transition, and it was prohibitive from actually seeing anything in LA because most of your time, 70% of your time was spent getting places.
Yeah.
And to me, that's so oh, there's a rabbit. Up there.
Yep, they're another ones that we have to protect our crops from.
Sorry for anyone who can't see what we're seeing, but it's just some
gophers,
cool stuff out here. I know I sound like such a city girl,
I saw deer just up the road.
Really?
Just another mile back towards town.
Wow.
Just a few days ago, there was 3 deer.
That's so cool.
Freshly mowed field over there. I came face to face with a bobcat back by the chicken coop.
Wow.
I think it was back in February, or maybe
Was
it was
that
early
terrifying?
March. I wasn't terrified. I was surprised, but as soon as I came around the corner and came face to face with it, it kind of went, "Oh, human," and ran off
And it
down the
ran off.
canyon.
Will they come at you?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think they're very shy.
That's the woodpecker,
That's the
right?
woodpecker.
What's he pecking at?
Probably the telephone pole.
Yeah, he is. I can see him. That's so cool. I know. Look, we don't have them in Australia, so I feel like I'm in an episode of National Geographic. I know everyone that's listening to this is thinking she is a crazy bitch. Correct. I'm just fascinated by stuff like this because I live in a city and I never get to see it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is being out here. You get in touch with nature. Whether it's watching a cloud bank roll in from the sea,
Yeah.
or hearing and seeing all of the wildlife. I probably see owls out here 4 times a week.
That's so great.
Yeah, and we have a pair of red-tailed hawks that nest in a big tree right over there on the corner of the property.
You'd never get sick of it. Do you get snakes? There's a hummingbird.
There are rattlesnakes out here in Duluth.
They will fuck you up, won't they?
I've never seen one on our property.
Yet.
Knock on wood. But I have seen California king snakes here on our
Are
property.
they poisonous?
They're not poisonous.
Oh, that's fine then.
They don't bite, and they actually will beat a rattlesnake in a fight. So
Great, you want to have more of them
keep
around.
the rattlesnakes away. So I'm like,
My
here's your
mum-
habitat. Here's your Garden of Eden.
My mum was telling me, I come from Australia, as you
Uh-huh.
know, and we have some snakes that will definitely fuck you up
Yeah.
over there. And, in Sydney, you don't see any of that stuff. But my mother grew up in a village in Syria, and our family are farmers over there. And she was telling us a story whereby my grandfather, they would take him lunch on the farm every day, and one day they saw the snake, the kids saw the snake, and they started screaming and shouting, and he's like, my grandfather was really upset that they were upset.
Uh-huh.
And my mother said, "Why are you angry at us for getting upset?" He said, "Well, because now I have to kill the snake. It's been here for the longest time. It was eating all the mice. So it's fine. I kept out of the snake's way, it kept out of my way, and it just took care of the mice.
Yeah.
But now I have to kill it because you're all scared of it."
Yeah, snakes are incredibly important to have around to keep down the rodent population.
Yeah, and as long as they're not rattlesnakes.
Most of the farmers that I know out here will relocate a snake rather than kill it.
Jesus.
And we're talking about the rattlers. Yeah, the other ones they just let be because they're not dangerous.
How do you relocate a rattlesnake without getting bitten?
Well,
is it a craft?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not like we call somebody.
Gonna have to have a stick and a bucket and a lid and get it or a bag.
Are you going to learn this craft?
If I have to, absolutely.
Does that? I mean, you being a city guy, I know you grew up on a farm and
Right.
whatnot, but you have been
Oregon in the Willamette Valley did not have poisonous snakes.
Right. So
Sweden did not have poisonous
you
snakes.
then go into like proper cities and live there for a few decades.
Yeah.
And now you make a complete lifestyle shift and a mindset shift.
Yeah.
And different things become different hazards.
Yeah, my parents make fun of me because growing up in rural Oregon, I wanted to be in the city. And as soon as I had my opportunity at 16 to move to the city, I moved to the city.
You moved at 16?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I started college at 16 just because I was so fed up with high school. And
You started college at 16?
yeah.
That's fantastic. What did you study?
Well, I was basically just studying the basic foundational stuff and applying credits towards a high school diploma.
That's great.
While also getting college credit at the same time. So I basically had done the math that I would get 3 years of school credit in 1 year, because I would get 2 years of high school credit and 1 year of college credit all through the same courses.
That's so great. And then what did you go on to study at university?
Well, after that, I was an actor and a performer and a circus performer, and
A circus performer?
yeah, part of my
Oh, wow, I thought you were going to
bizarre
let that...
background.
Hold on. So you're a childhood actor, you were on TV and did that kind of stuff, and then you traveled the world with the circus.
Well, I didn't travel the world. I traveled the United States.
States
Yeah, I
with the
toured with a
circus.
small ensemble show called the Royal Liechtenstein Circus There's
What a
still a
great name.
few dusty old videos on YouTube that have been published.
Can you send me some links, please?
And
That
there's,
sounds like it'd be fun.
so we were an ensemble of clowns doing, juggling and tumbling and magic acts and things like that.
Where does one learn how to do those things? I know now there are circus schools, but
Right. Back then there weren't. Not so many.
yeah.
So I basically, I learned juggling in my backyard and, through books, taught myself. And then I applied, because I had some theater background, I applied to be part of this traveling circus troupe. And then I got my training, on the show. So
So it wasn't like a woman led you there or anything like that. You were just,
no,
I want to be a part of the circus.
right.
And so you joined the circus, and then you.
So after the circus tour was when I moved to Sweden, and in Sweden, I started teaching circus arts to people and importing props for people, and that's how my cafe over there really came into being. I was a juggling shop, but I needed more revenue to pay the overhead.
Wait. You had a cafe that was a juggling shop.
Right.
That sounds like the most badass thing in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a stage, and it had a quite high ceiling. So my whole idea was to give people a space where even if they didn't need to buy new juggling balls and juggling clubs on a regular basis, they could at least come out to hang out with each other and exchange ideas and
Practice juggling.
just kind of build community around that, because there was a community there that was kind of underserved in the street performer, but there were, we had musicians and actors and all kinds of creative people that kind of congregated around it, because we had a stage where people could go up and, try something out, or someone could just come in off the street and play
it was
guitar.
busy?
And yeah, we were very busy.
Fuck. You know what it sounds like? My ex-husband and I used to drive past this place called the Hockey Shop.
Uh-huh.
And it was a hockey shop. Hockey in Australia is not like here. Nobody plays hockey.
Okay.
Not a lot of people play hockey anyway. A whole country has 22 million people in it. And I'm sure there's only one hockey shop in the whole of Australia. But how busy could they possibly be? And we used to make that joke every time we drove past there, because there was never anybody in this fucking hockey shop. We're like, there's the hockey shop still in business 3 years later after we've been driving here. And a juggling cafe. Right.
Because I had my, I started my business online selling mail order like in 1992, when we were still using dial-up modems.
Far
But
out.
because, Scandinavia is just covered in isolated small communities, everybody, as soon as the internet was available, started congregating, making these connections. And so I would go out and sell my wares at a festival here and there. But through the majority of the year, it was mail order for people.
Yeah.
So they would say, well, hey, I'm interested in this unicycle, or I'm interested in these stilts, but I want someplace to try them out first.
And that led to...
And so, I had to build someplace for them to come and try things out. And so I realized that I might not have enough revenue to pay the rent. But if I could sell coffee, and I'd had, like I told you earlier, long-time dreams of a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And so I made a very Americanized version of an espresso bar in Sweden that had never seen anything like that. So
what were they drinking before that?
Well, they were drinking, espresso, cappuccino, lattes, very,
Euro style.
Euro style. But that was kind of it. It was either your brewed house coffee, or you were getting a latte or a cappuccino.
Cappuccino with like bubble bath on top of it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So I came in, and I'd met a guy from New York in Stockholm who had a bagel factory.
In Stockholm?
In Stockholm. And so I got his bagels into my cafe in Gothenburg when nobody had had a bagel before.
Was that like the hockey shop? Did anyone know how to eat bagels over there?
They didn't. We had to teach them.
I figured. It's exactly like the hockey shop.
Or people would come in and they say, oh, I had these when I was in New York, and this is exactly the same. So, we were trying to give people that, surprise element and something new. And I started doing, hand-scooped hard milkshakes and espresso milkshakes and things like that just literally blew people's minds. Because the only milkshake they'd ever had came from
McDonald's?
yeah, a fast food chain that starts
Yeah.
with M.
Yeah. I hate that word.
So they were like, "Wow, we didn't know you could do this," and so it was a lot of fun, and people really embraced it. And when I came back to the United States, my initial plan was to do this concept all over again, up in Oregon, in Portland, because I basically had my prototype, my proof of concept had worked, and so, but life took different turns.
Now
and,
you have a coffee
and
farm.
now I have a coffee farm. Yeah.
Which is crazy. That's yeah.
I just got very passionate about the environment and decided to put all my efforts into environmentally positive activities, basically.
So why coffee farming and not peaches?
Well, in this particular location, it's because peaches don't grow well. So
But
it's
avocados will, right?
it's an opportunity. So it's a good use of underutilized farmland.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that has a smaller environmental footprint than, say, an avocado tree. A mature avocado tree, when it's in fruiting season, needs about 300 gallons per week per tree.
Yep. How much?
Where
Sorry.
300.
Yeah.
Whereas a coffee plant is only going to need about 30
Okay.
to 40 gallons per tree per week. So it's vastly different,
More sustainable.
needs. And so we happen to be in this very unique microclimate where coffee has been proven by UC Davis and other people in the marketplace to be a viable alternative crop for us.
So let's talk about genetics for a second.
Sure.
It's one of my favorite subjects, as you know. When we're looking at the kinds of varietals and the kinds of different options available to you with regards to the plants that you're going to use,
Uh-huh.
how are you going to approach that?
So I'm approaching it by tapping into the network that we already have established. So we have a third generation coffee farmer from Costa Rica that has property here in Duluth. And so he's kind of our advisor, and he's providing some of the genetic material for the project. The research that's been done by UC Davis, they've had good success with the geisha varieties here.
The farms that are up in Santa Barbara?
And the Katui varieties. So those two seem to be the most promising. They've had cupping scores, 92, 93 off the coffees in Santa Barbara.
Have they tested Robusta?
I don't know if they have. I think because
I don't want to encourage that behaviour, but I don't want to discourage it either.
encourage the behavior.
Well, only because, this isn't a typical coffee farming
Sure.
land, so we don't know what we would get if we tried new things.
Right.
So that's why I was just
And this
wondering
is
about that.
going to be a massive experiment because we have a lot of variation in the topography out here, and we have a lot of variety in the soil conditions out here.
Because you've played with the topography on this land, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you are manipulating the topography
Right.
to work specifically for you with regards to the elevation that you naturally get here.
Right.
And you mess with the topography to help with the directional flow of the
Exactly.
water and things, right?
So I like to say the game is to not let a single drop of water flow off my property.
Love that.
And so we're building earth structures to harvest rainwater and soak it into the earth. And the more it soaks in, the more it becomes available to the plants, and the more that the earth can then receive in the future. So it's a beneficial cycle that we're creating. So
Geisha and
It's-
Katuai,
those seem to be so far the most promising two varieties.
is that because that's all they've tested, or is that just because they've had success with the testing that they've done on those plants? Do
Yeah,
you know?
those are the ones that have scored the highest
Okay.
in cupping. So
Will you, with regards to those, will you actually mill everything here, or will you have another property where you go and mill everything from?
So our idea here is to be the hub, to be the mill, as well as the farm. So this will allow other farmers that we're working with in the neighborhood to have their own micro lots.
Of coffee.
But right now there's there's another coffee farm in Fallbrook, but their coffee, I think, goes to Santa Barbara for processing.
Wow.
And so, we don't necessarily need that environmental footprint of that coffee being
Right.
trucked north and then trucked south again. So if we can keep it hyper local, and this is where our advisor, from Costa Rica really helps us out
Yeah.
a lot. We've got some access to, equipment and things like that we can bring up from Costa Rica to get started here initially until we kind of get the ball rolling financially.
Are you speaking to other coffee farmers from around the world in how you might be able to get this farm established?
Yeah, I am. I'm in contact with some farms in Vietnam and some farms in Burundi as well as Costa Rica.
And what are the climates that are most similar to this climate? What countries have that are coffee farming countries are the most closely related to what we experience here in Southern California?
I'd say the farms in Vietnam are the closest climate analog.
How so?
Just the temperature and moisture
I don't know
throughout
why
the
I
year.
thought Vietnam was more tropical. Because we're desert, right?
But they're in kind of a rain shadow, I think, and so they're a
Okay.
little bit drier. So here, about 70% of our annual moisture really comes from fog.
I was going
and
to say
not
from
rain.
the it comes off the top of the ocean, doesn't
Right.
it? Yeah.
And so the Deleuze Creek watershed flows into the Santa Margarita River just a couple miles from here. And then the Santa Margarita River flows out to sea. It crosses Camp Pendleton and flows out into the Pacific Ocean. And so there's sort of high mountains on both sides of those creek beds. So when a storm front or a fog front rolls in from the ocean, it flows up the creeks. And we can literally sit on the back porch and watch that whole fog
That
bank
must
roll
be
in
so cool.
and go past the mountains. And sometimes we watch rain go right past us because it's following the creek line.
Wow.
And so our other farms, they're closer to the creek than we are. And so they'll benefit from more of that atmospheric moisture
Wow.
that comes in.
Is that I'm terrible at physics, so help me here. Is that because of the air temperature, it being warmer than the temperature of the water as it comes past is picking up the moisture and rising? Is that what's happening there?
Well, part of it is I don't know the exact answer to that question. So heat rises
Yeah.
and cool sinks, right?
Yeah.
So when you have a valley, you have the cold moisture air sinks into the bottom of that valley.
Okay.
But I think it's more of a function of the topography when that fog bank rolls in, that you have high mountains on both sides, and
And
so
it's
the fog is
sucking
just
it
kind
up.
of going up the middle, just based on the breezes and wind flows and things like that. But it's something that we have as a known quantity. We know that this fog is going to roll in. We
happens
know
year
that the
on year.
dew sets it in the evening and things like that. And so, one of our mantras is to plant the rain first. So that's why you see a lot of earthworks going in on the property.
Yeah, there's a
and
lot
you
of
see us laying out the
preparation
irrigation, even though the plants aren't, going to be in the ground for another 6 or 7 months. So that's sort of, all part and parcel of the overall master plan is harvesting the rain, planting the rain first, making sure that the reason that we have thriving oak trees is because the oak trees just have, hundreds and hundreds of square feet of actual surface area within their
For the
branches
root
and their
system.
leaves.
Oh, yeah.
And so oak trees catch fog. And that's why they're so healthy in this climate, even though it's so dry and we get so little rain.
And so is establishing that ecosystem before you get the coffee plants in here, is that a part of the Grand Master
Yeah,
Plan?
absolutely. Absolutely.
It's the slow and steady approach.
It's slow. Yeah, I always play the long game.
Yeah, well, you and I both, mate. That's why I'm all
Yeah.
into 10-year maps. And none of
I
this
want to
get
see
quick
this
grit.
farm outlive me by 100 years.
What's the financial mindset when you approach something like this? This is an enormous time investment. Is this the thing that you want to be spending the rest of your life doing?
Because I'm passionate about it, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily financially motivated, at the core.
But you've got a pay for the land tax and you've got to pay for the coffee and
right.
the
We
employees.
have to be fiscally responsible.
Absolutely.
It has to pencil out, and we think it does pencil out because of the growth of the specialty coffee industry. So the way we have to backtrack a little bit here in the
please do.
storyline. So when I worked in the solar industry,
Yeah.
and was still very, very interested in coffee, I heard stories of villages in Nicaragua that had no electricity, and that the village might have one cell phone. And so someone would ride their bike to the nearest town to charge that cell phone to take it back to the village so the people in that village could keep in touch with the outside world.
That's fantastic.
And I said, well, what they need is, a solar panel in that village, right? So my philanthropic side said, let's donate some solar panels to these villages. And let's start a coffee company where we can, spin off some of the profits into some philanthropic efforts. But then I started hearing other stories. I didn't want to just be that colonialist,
that white guy that goes and does that
come
stuff.
in and like, oh, we know better here. You poor primitive people have some of our technology. So I started, doing a lot of reading on this topic, and I heard about solar panels that had stopped working. And they didn't quite know what to do with them, so they just basically turned them into side tables.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful side tables of solar panels. And so I said, okay, well, if we're going to do this project, we really have to think it through a lot more. And so, through this process, I met the coffee farmer from Costa Rica out here, and started, finding out what they needed. And electricity is one of the things they do need. He's intensely interested in getting his processing plant in Costa Rica run on solar power, because electricity in Costa Rica is prohibitively expensive. And so that all goes into the cost of producing that coffee and bringing it to market. So there's definitely a place for solar power and renewable energy within the coffee growing world, but I wanted to know more and learn more about what they're going through and what they need. And I also, because of our work with regenerative agriculture, wanted to start to tie these things together. So the longer term master plan is that when we have more coffee available for the market, and whether that be beans that we're importing from around the world or beans that we're growing ourselves, just as the coffee company sort of grows and comes into its own and we start to have profits we can spin off, go to our growing partners around the world and help them implement water harvesting techniques, or it may just be that we're going and teaching them classes rather than just donating technology and saying, here you go, take this until it breaks. So we want things to be sustainable and serviceable and maintainable in the communities, but we also want to fulfill needs that they really, really have, and not some perceived need that we think that they have from the other side of the planet.
Yeah, that's something that we need to figure out with a whole bunch of ways that we approach helping people around the world, no matter who we are. Does that become intimidating coming from the idea of, well, I have to figure out how to do this myself first before I can help anybody else? Is that intimidating in any way?
I'm not intimidated by it at all. It's
not even a little bit terrified?
Not even a little bit terrified. The things that terrify me are a heavy freeze that could kill the trees. But it's a known threat, right? It's a known hazard that we can plan for and have systems in place to address that when it comes up, because obviously it will. It may only happen once every 7 years or every 10 years, but we know now, because we saw it this winter, that we can have a hard freeze even here in San Diego County. 12 miles from the ocean,
it's crazy.
It kind of blows my mind that it happened, but it did, and it's our new reality.
What would that do to you if you had all of your land covered in fruit-bearing trees? What would that total your crop for a year?
It could potentially, sure.
That doesn't terrify you?
You got to roll with the punches,
Great.
when you're a farmer.
And especially if you're playing the long game.
Yeah. So fortunately, there are protections in place. Through the USDA, you can get crop insurance.
Yeah, insurances and things like that. We're lucky to
So-
have access to those kinds of things in this country.
Right.
And in countries, Western countries. I'm sure that farmers in Rwanda don't have access to that kind of
Right.
stuff.
But this is another area where we need to be very on the forefront and vocal about what we're doing, because their crop insurance probably doesn't cover coffee,
Yeah, right.
because nobody's grown it on the mainland commercially. Or maybe because they grow it in Hawaii, they do.
Right. So,
So
these are
We have to
first
make
conversations.
sure that, the crop insurance that we need is going to be in place, when the time comes for us to use it.
And you're essentially you're part of a select group of people that are pioneering this. And if it works, there'll be a fuck ton of people that'll come on board and want to open coffee farms here, because it's way cheaper to do it here, one would think, than having to go and set up a farm in Panama.
Yeah.
But you get a lot of expats that are just going to Panama and buying farms
Yeah.
and setting up there.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, the prediction is that the California domestic coffee market will be larger than the Hawaiian coffee market. And because in California we have all these avocado groves, and the coffee is a good companion plant for the avocados, that it gives a lot of, there's potential in the marketplace, both for the growers and for consumers. But because we're also a wine producing region,
Yep.
people can understand the terroir of the coffee a little bit better, and kind of approach it from that standpoint, and the uniqueness of the cup and the uniqueness of the microlots.
Can you co-plant coffee trees with wine, with wine producing grape trees?
I wouldn't see why not.
Has it been done much around here?
I haven't seen it.
It seems like a no-brainer, right? Because it's the same kind of approach.
Yeah, the vineyards tend to be planted very intensively in pretty tight rows.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see where there might be room. You might just do like the ends of rows with coffee shrubs or something like that. And grapes, I know, are something that need very little water. My wife spent some time in Italy, and she said that the Italian saying is, where nothing else grows, plant grapes.
Yeah.
So I think coffee needs a little bit more fertility and a little bit more water than that. So they are, subtropical crop after all. And so grapes and coffee may or may not be a good companion. It's been proven that avocados and coffee are good companions.
Because that's what they're doing up in Santa Barbara.
That's what they're doing in Santa Barbara, and here in Fallbrook as well.
Oh, cool. What's your approach going to be with regards to things like crop rotation?
Well, the coffee trees won't be rotated.
Can they stay on the same ground year on year out?
Yeah. So as we build fertility in the system, see, the reason that crops are rotated are because they become
They rape the
nutrient
soil.
deficient
Yeah.
in something, right? So you want to plant something else that will put some of that nutrient back. But because we are planting interspecies, as you can see these
Yeah.
mounds over here, we'll have fig trees and pomegranate trees, guava trees, and then we'll have leguminous nitrogen fixing ground cover crops. We'll have pigeon pea and fava beans and various things like that are adding nutrient to the soil. So rather than rotating through crops, we will just focus on planting those things that
Wow.
feed the soil.
What about pests? What role do you foresee? And you can never predict these things, but what are the kinds of issues that you anticipate with regards to the kinds of pests that could eat the coffee plants or burrow into the cherries or
Right.
anything like that?
It's possible that the coffee cherry could be susceptible to something like the olive fly, the olive fly that burrows into the fruit of the olive, so that olive becomes unusable. We have to work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture or the San Diego County Extension agent just because nobody's really done that much research on these topics,
Right.
right? So in an organic farming scenario, there are certain topical sprays that are used. They're still organic, but like neem oil and things like that.
Or citrus oils, like not necessarily a citrus oil, but
Right.
something that's plant-based
Right.
rather than being chemical-based.
Or what they'll use on the olive trees is something called surround, which is basically like clay that's been dissolved in water. And I may be oversimplifying this. I don't know all the science behind it. But basically, you spray it on the tree. It looks like it's been spray painted white or something like that.
But it's a physical
basically,
barrier.
It's a physical barrier.
Yeah.
It confuses the bugs so they don't know that fruit is there to latch onto. So that's why, yeah, we do want to proceed, with a certain degree of caution. But we anticipate that the same things that attack our other crops, could potentially attack our coffee cherries. And so we just have to be ready, and kind of experiment and learn from others who have a little more experience ahead
It'll
of us.
be some trial and error, I guess,
Yeah.
for the first good 10 years, right?
Hopefully not that long, but yeah, in the first 3 to 5 years, I think we'll learn a lot about protecting against the predator insects in our neighborhood.
Because it's, I mean, I wonder if it's a potential, and I mean, I don't know, but there's a potential that pests that haven't presented themselves as pests before, because coffee farms aren't
Right.
necessarily something that's native to the region, but they could present themselves as a predator to the trees
Right.
now, right?
Right. Yeah, I had one of my neighbors who has a vineyard. He'll have hordes of crows come in and start to eat his fruit before the brix is
Wow.
quite right to make wine out of, and so it's kind of like that. It's, even though it's not native or you don't typically see swarms and swarms of crows, we may have the
It
same
happens.
thing come onto our coffee cherries when they're super sweet, right?
Because we have different, fauna here in Southern California, and they have in
Right.
Rwanda and in Nigeria and all these kinds of places.
So
Nicaragua,
we'll probably
sorry.
have to plant, under nets quite a bit, when the
Yeah.
fruit's starting
Like
to
with
ripen.
figs, what you do with figs and things like that.
Yeah. So, we have to anticipate what things can come up and have the protections already in line, to make sure that our crop, maintains its integrity and can be
Yeah,
brought to
awesome.
market.
Tell me about the workforce. Like, what are you anticipating? I mean, first of all, how big is from a number of trees perspective, how many trees do you anticipate having?
On this parcel, I'm planning on 3,000 trees. It's roughly 800 to 900 trees per acre is what's the maximum density. And because we're working with the topography and various microclimates, not every place on the farm is going to be good for a coffee tree. And so then that's why we're also working with our partner farms to work with their natural topography and their natural microclimates and their soil conditions. So we've got, we have a population in Los Angeles and San Diego and Orange County that is emigrated from Central America, and a lot of them have experience on coffee farms. And so, we're seeking those people out, especially around harvest time, to get experienced people for the harvest is really, really important to us. We also want to be able to pay fair wages.
What does fair wages look like to you?
Well,
That's a big discussion happening in the coffee
sure.
industry right now.
I mean, I think $15 an hour living wage is a really good target to aim for.
In a few years, that's going to be the minimum wage.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That would be great.
It's definite, like it's been written into law.
Yeah.
So 2020, California starts with minimum wage.
Right.
as
So
15.
all of our planning for our espresso bars and things that we're planning to open, $15 an hour wage is absolutely
Wait,
written in
what?
stone.
What espresso bars are you planning on opening? I didn't know this.
Well, that's the master plan for the Duluth Coffee Company.
Okay.
We'll have our own chain of coffee shops as well. And that's to kind of establish
You're
our
not going to
foothold.
sleep for the next 40 years. That's the plan?
That's the
Is
plan.
you're going to be busy
Yeah.
enough? I can recognize a little bit of that myself. I got a little bit going on too. So $15 an hour workforce, and you're going to look for who to come and work on your coffee farms. Do you want people in the coffee industry? Do you want people who have previously been coffee farmers that have found their way to California?
Yeah, so we know that there's a population in Southern California, and we're incredibly lucky that they are here. There are people who've been displaced from coffee growing regions in Central America. And so we will seek them out, and I know some of them come from El Salvador. We've actually worked with a couple of women from El Salvador who grew up on coffee farms and started picking coffee when they were 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
And now they work in janitorial services in Los Angeles.
Right.
And so we want to, and those people, they're longing to get back to their farms. So, it's going to be a really welcoming community to bring those people here and provide them employment, but have that, that experience that's just literally in their fingertips,
Yeah.
knowing what they're doing. So, and I was really shocked that, our advisor from Costa Rica, he had a hard time getting pickers for his coffee farm last year.
In Costa Rica.
He's like, oh yeah, they all went to Panama or they all went to Nicaragua to harvest, and there's nobody here right now to harvest.
Because
they're an itinerant workforce.
Okay.
And so they're going where the harvesting is happening, or to the farmer that's paying them the most to pick.
I don't know if you heard in the news, there are a bunch of NPR stories on the fact that there are a lot of farms that aren't able here in Southern California to have the fruit picked from the trees across everything. Santa
Right.
Barbara experienced it and everything because of a lot of the political climate. People worried about ice turning up on farms and actually catching undocumented people and shipping them away. So people lost a lot of their workforce.
Right.
Do you anticipate that would present a problem? Or do we hope that it's all settled by then and DACA has been reinstated and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's such a turbulent landscape to navigate. I have absolutely no idea. We do have ICE sets up a roadblock, between here and Fallbrook.
Yeah.
And stopping cars coming in here. Feels like a violation of my civil rights.
Yeah,
personally.
I can imagine.
And thank goodness I don't have dark skin because I don't get hassled so much, right? But we are looking for people who are living and working legally domestically here in the United States, who come from those regions and have some experience in harvesting. And if we find 2 people, those 2 people know 2 people, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So we may get a group of 12 people from El Salvador with some experience. We may borrow the manager from the coffee farm in Costa Rica to come,
Sponsor them out here for
lead a
couple
crew
months.
or teach some people. So we've got fortunately some good strong relationships in that category to get us some help.
Great.
And we've got a couple of years,
and it just
to
grows,
plan.
doesn't it?
And it just grows. Right.
People will hear this podcast from all over the world. They'll decide that they may want to reach out and say, if we can help, if you need any information, we've got a climate that's similar to yours. Are you open to hearing that kind of
Oh yeah,
thing from
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the reasons we're doing it, is we know that, with coffee rust and changes to our climate profiles, whether it be, higher heat or more torrential rains, there's all kinds of different climate aspects that can damage the coffee crop, that the more coffee we can plant now, the more protected we are in the future,
Yeah.
right? And the more that we can use this as a laboratory experiment. I don't know of anybody in Central America who's planting their coffee on the hugel mounds, which is the dirt on top of the logs.
Okay.
But if that's something that we do here that can then be adopted in Ethiopia, Rwanda,
I think there may be a shortage of trees there.
but other organic matter, right?
Exactly, yes.
That can be buried and held as a sponge, But we're also experimenting with rapid growth trees that don't need a lot of moisture, such as the moringa, which is also a highly nutrient dense food crop. The foliage can be eaten like lettuce, or it can be juiced, or you can eat the seed pod as young like a green bean, or you can dry it, and the seeds have been used for purifying water.
Wow.
So, and it grows in extremely harsh, dry conditions.
How do they do that?
And they
How do
grow
they purify
fast.
the water with it?
It's basically, you take like pond water in a jar, mix it with the moringa seeds, and shake it up and let it sit, and it'll like
It
all of
absorbs
all of the bad microbes and what flocculate to the seeds
That's
like a magnet,
amazing.
and it purifies the water so you can drink it.
I'm getting the sense that essentially what's going to start happening here is hopefully an information co-op,
Right.
where people start exchanging information with you, you start exchanging permaculture ideas with them, and hopefully we start to get a flow of information going on.
Yeah.
Are you looking at, because you were telling us before we went live on the podcast, we were talking about the little tiny houses you're going to have available
Right.
around the place. Is this somewhere that you want to invite people who want to intern for you and do things like that? Is that an idea? Is that something?
Yeah,
you're planning for the
we're
future?
looking for farm interns right now, and then I also
Agricultural graduates or people who are in the coffee industry that want to start learning how to farm?
they don't have to have a coffee background.
Okay.
They don't have to have an agricultural background. They just have to have a willingness to learn and intellectual curiosity.
And you'll house them here in the tiny houses and
Yep.
teach them what they need to know. And
Yep.
that's exciting. How can people get in contact with you if they want to do that?
I would go either through my Instagram account at Deleuze Coffee, or go to the website.
Or you can
and look up
email
our
us and we'll
contact.
put imapperforward at Gmail or through any of our socials.
Yeah,
And we'll put you in contact.
DeleuzeCoffee@gmail.com is also a great way to get in touch. There's a lot of farmers out here that are watching with great interest what we're doing.
Oh, I bet.
So we've got opportunities for joint venturing, or could be donations to our non-for-profit to help us with our habitat restoration, our bee sanctuary, or water harvesting, and as we progress and get more of our infrastructure in place, we'll have open houses and farm to table dinners and things like that, where people can come out and experience things a little more firsthand.
That's exciting.
As well.
Do you anticipate from now, are you thinking about how you're going to process? I know that we talked about the mill, but are you looking at producing natural coffees, or are you looking at fermentation tanks? Are you looking at washed coffees? Like, what's the approach that you're expecting to take there?
Washed coffees, I think, will be probably the predominant mode, but it's also going to depend a little bit on what the market is asking us for. We're interested and open to collaborations. So if one coffee roaster comes to us and says, "Oh, we're really curious about some naturals from Deleuze," then maybe we'll produce naturals for them.
Wow, because people know what African coffees typically taste like.
Right.
They know what Colombian coffees typically taste like. What does Californian coffee typically taste like? I've not had any from Santa Barbara. Is there a flavor-ish profile that's starting to evolve?
I'm maybe not the level of taster that you are. I think definitely you're going to taste some flavor profiles there that are unique. But I don't know that there's enough data out there to say that this is what California coffee tastes like yet.
Yeah, that we don't know what that is yet.
Right.
We don't know if it's going to be.
So because we don't have high elevation that we're growing on, we do have the latitude. So the coffee cherries are slower ripening on the tree, so that the brix is getting quite high at harvest time.
Okay.
And so that natural sweetness is going to definitely come out in the cup.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting coffees.
I can't wait. I'm.
No doubt about it.
We've already started the conversation of I can't wait to taste it as elixir. Then
Yeah.
we'll really get an understanding for what's going on there.
Yeah.
And now that you've tasted elixir,
Yeah, my mind is just going.
what are the questions?
Well, I'm just because I'm a kind of a student of marketing and business geek.
Go on.
I'm just like, so is it the cocktail community embracing this? Is it people buying it for the refreshing beverageness of it?
If I'm honest, we're still trying to figure that out. We're 3 years in and we're still working on figuring out who elixir is for. We're the only ones in the world that make it.
Yeah.
And it's such a unique product that we have to
Like
be
that sip, I just got chocolate brownie almost.
It's fun, isn't it? It's it's so much fun watching people drink elixir for the first time. I know
Cheers
that's
to elixir.
cheers, mates. It's just one of those things where, you know, when we say looks like whiskey, feels like tea, made from coffee and unlike anything you've had before, people say to me, that's such a wankerish statement to make. I'm like, listen, there's no other way to describe it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's unlike anything you've ever tasted before because I'm trying to say, oh, you've got to have this. It tastes so fabulous. I'm like, it literally doesn't taste like anything you've had before.
Right.
And we don't know how to describe it
Right.
other than that. Then people taste it and they're like, oh, that's bang on. That's
Yeah.
exactly how I would describe elixir. And so I think it was funny. I was talking to somebody yesterday about, you know, how we're expanding through the US. And I've decided to take the approach that we are going to go for the kind of clientele that is going to be the path of least resistance for me. You know, specialty coffee, a lot of people in specialty coffee just want to blockade what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And good on them. They can have that battle. I don't want to be a part of that. I am happy to just get about the business of creating an extraordinary business. And so for me, it's about going directly to the people who want this product. And there are a lot of people who want this product.
Yeah.
And they just want to enjoy it. They don't care about the, oh, you're fucking up specialty coffee and you're doing this to specialty coffee and that to specialty coffee and who do you think you are, etc. I don't want to engage in that. I just want to go to the people who want to buy it and have fun drinking it and get mind fucked by it, because that's what happens with everybody.
Right.
Everybody says one of two things: what the fuck, or oh my God, that's interesting. And you can watch it happening. They take a sip, they look up to the right, they are confused. And then they take another sip and they look up to the left and they're still confused.
Yeah.
And then the words come out.
Well, it's so hard to wrap my mind around that this has come out of a roasted coffee bean.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the coffee aromas are there, the flavor profiles are there, the texture's a little bit different, the mouthfeel, but it's...
You expect it to taste like
You
watered
can't
down
quite
cold
put it
brew.
down.
You can't.
You just
You were like, no,
go
I
back,
got to
go
check
back.
again.
Yeah.
Is that what's going on? If you drink it, you'll taste like that Manuka honey we were talking about, and that will continue to develop on your palate. And you're like, but no, hold on. Is that what was really going on? And you take another sip. And I find that really fun. And so when we're talking about who do we want to take this to market to, is it for the cocktail world or is it for the coffee world or whatever? It's just for people who find this shit interesting.
Right.
And are happy to pay $8 a bottle.
Right.
That's what it costs. This is not... Somebody said to me on Instagram, bless his heart, he had bought some elixir online and loved it. He got an elixir trio, which is 3 bottles in a different hour. And if you buy that the first time, that costs $24. And then after that, you get 3 bottles for the price of 2.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I love this. I would rather drink this instead of cold brew, but it's too expensive. And he's clearly on a barista wage.
Yeah.
This is not meant to replace cold brew. They're different products.
Right.
They're completely, you've tasted it. Before you tasted it, I said to you, what are you expecting this to taste like? And you're like, something like a cold brew, sort of. And people think it's watered down cold brew. I promise you, and I'm saying this officially, I've said it before, this is not a watered down product. This is the product as it's made, right? And so when people come and say those things to me, I'm not upset that you're drinking a cold brew wishing that you were having elixir. From a marketing perspective, that's gold.
Yeah.
Excuse the pun. But I'm not going to apologize for the fact that you are drinking a $3 or $4 cold brew wishing that you were drinking elixir. Sorry, no, I don't care. That upsets you. And I'd be a moron if I was like, oh, how can I get this to you for $2?
Right.
You can have your cold brew.
Right.
But I want you to want to have elixir as a special treat.
Yeah, it really is. It's something very special.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's high praises coming from you, sir. Being a marketing man yourself.
Well, you know, I know how much work goes into developing, you know, a concept and taking it to market. You know, I mean, it's a huge amount of work. You know, so the fact that you have a product on the shelf that's new and unique. I mean, that's because so much of what we do, even if we think it's new, it's really some variation on something else, right? Which is what entrepreneurs do, right? We see an opportunity here, an opportunity there, and an idea and a technique from this and that, and we kind of mash things together into something new that works, but it's kind of borrowed things, whereas this feels really new and unique.
Oh, no one's ever tasted anything like it. And I don't say that to sound like a narcissist or pompous or anything like that. I was just as surprised by this as anybody else. Like, I didn't set out to create something new. So this was when I tasted it, I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And that hasn't stopped.
Right.
For 3 years, I haven't stopped being mind blown by this product. And that's when you know, like, this is cool. This is something fun. This is legitimately going to be hard to get people to understand.
Yeah.
And it really is. The biggest question we get from our baristas that work for our elixir dealers is, how do I sell this? I don't understand it.
Right.
And coming up with that part of the strategy was difficult. I ended up becoming one of those things of, well, just with who we can let sell elixir for that very reason. The only sales strategy that works with this is if you pick up a bottle and you see a customer who they like interesting things, and you know that they're going to try elixir.
Right.
The only sales strategy that works is you've got to try this. Because you could try and explain elixir. I'm the creator of it and I can't figure out how to
Oh yeah,
describe
I mean, I've read your website and followed your podcast and followed your Instagram account, and just like, what is it? What is it? What is it?
And I'm not trying to be ridiculously mysterious. I legitimately cannot describe this beverage to you. You've tasted it now. You try and describe it. I can't do it. So at the end of the day, what I say to people when they say, how am I meant to sell this?
And it's more than just the flavor too. You know, I'm definitely getting a pick-me-up out of it that I don't even get from my own coffee anymore.
It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like remember I was saying to you, you'll just feel more vibrant.
Right. It's a little buzzy.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you get the tingly arms?
It's more...
I used to have vocal lessons done at my house. My vocal coach would come over. I was getting ready for an album, and my vocal coach would come over and he would say to me, can we do some elixir? I'm like, it's not weed, it's not cocaine or anything like that. It's coffee. He's like, I know, but when I leave here, I feel like I've just done a proper drug. Because all around here, I feel like I'm transcending something. Can I do some elixir? Okay, yeah, no problem. But going back to that thing of taking a product to market, when people say to me, I figured out how elixir's made, I'm going to destroy your business. I'm like, yeah, good luck. If you think that the only thing about a business is the product, good fucking luck.
Right.
Do it, try it, take it to market if you think that you know how it's made.
Sure.
Because then I want to see what you're going to call it. I want to see how you're going to get it out there, what branding you're going to use for it. I mean, that's one advantage of being the first to market, is that you get to be the Coke.
Yeah.
And Pepsi, no matter how hard it tries, is still never going to be Coke. But I didn't name it.
Yeah.
Customers named it.
Oh, really?
I was trialing out to, because I had no idea what I was going to call it. And at this stage, I was just developing the idea and the flavor and whatnot. And I was still at that high-end bakery. And some of my customers would come in and I would give it to, tell me what you think, tell me what you think. And this one day it was really hot, and one of my customers came in and he said, hey Lee, do you have any of that elixir of yours? And then that very after, a woman came in and she said, gosh, I hope you've got some of that great elixir of yours. I'm like, okay, we're onto something here.
Yeah.
That's the name, the people have named it. And our tagline is purity, clarity, authenticity. And they were the words that people were starting to use to describe elixir. You know, it's got a purity to it that I've never tasted in any other kind of coffee, and in both visually and the flavor profile of it. And it's the most authentic way they've ever tasted coffee. And people were using these words. And if there's anything I've learned from marketing, being not a marketer, but from observing brands and observing the way that different music brands put themselves out there, let the market determine what it likes about what you're doing. And that's a much easier path to get a product to market than anything.
Yeah.
And so we did that, and people were genuinely interested in what we were doing immediately. We were getting people from coffee farms in Panama and in Brazil. We had just hit the market and they were asking if they could send us coffee for elixir.
Wow.
It was insane. Oh, there's a lizard. I sound like such a city girl, I swear. Is it a gecko or is it a lizard?
No, it's just a lizard.
He's cute. Have you seen the kinds of lizards we've got in Australia? They will fuck you up.
Is that right?
Oh, there's a video of Steve Irwin that he was, I think it was a blue tongue lizard, or it may have been a goanna. And goannas can get 2 or 3 meters big. They're huge.
Oh, wow.
And this goanna was coming up to him and got him on the, just here on the, and it bit on him and it just kept sucking the blood out of his hand. That is an Australian lizard. Like, those animals will properly fuck you up.
Yeah, we have some lizards that are a little bit larger than those that are called alligator lizards, but I don't think they even grow more than maybe a foot long, nose to tail. And, you know, if you startle one of those in the bushes, it might bite you.
Yeah, but they don't eat people.
No, they're definitely not going to eat anybody.
Our crocodiles eat people.
Yes.
We have some gnarly animals in Australia. Come visit us.
Yeah. We got great white sharks right off the ocean here.
They don't want to eat humans. They just
No.
attack stupid humans who are, you know, anyway, let's not go there. One of my friends was bitten in the face by a shark.
Ooh.
He was... Anyway, this was outstanding.
Well, thank you for coming.
Sir.
Thanks for the visit.
Thank you so much for reaching out and inviting me to come up here. I hope that I can keep coming back and having these conversations with you every few months and tracking the progress of how it's all going. I feel very humbled to see it at the